Welcome back to Drawn to Darkness, a bi-weekly podcast where we discuss our favorite horror and true crime. If you count yourself among Stephen King's constant readers, we're here for you. My name is Annie, and I'll be introducing Caroline to my favorite horror movies, podcasts, TV shows, and books.
And I'm Caroline, and I'll be doing the same from the true crime side of things.
So, I have a question for you, Caroline. Would you rather be telekinetic, telepathic, or have powers of teleportation?
Teleportation.
Yeah, same. Why?
The other ones seem like too much pressure, responsibility, stress, anxiety. I have enough of all of those things.
Telepathy, definitely. Like, I don't want to know what anybody thinks about me in their deepest, darkest moments.
No.
But teleportation, no more waiting in traffic, no more long flights. That would be a dream.
Absolutely. I love to travel. I hate to fly. I used to love flying, and I've been very phobic of it since I was about 10. But I do love traveling, so that would be amazing. I also hate wasting time, and it feels like you waste so much time getting to the airport.
So much time.
And being at the airport and having delays of different kinds and all that.
Well, the reason I'm asking you about teleportation and telekinesis is because we are about to talk about Stephen King's first novel, Carrie, where the main character is telekinetic. She's one of the many Carries and Carolines in my life. I wanted to ask you, Caroline, what is your Stephen King experience? Was this your first Stephen King novel? How do you feel about the different movies you may have seen? Things like that.
I did not realize this was his first book, literally until you just said that. I read, I think it's the 4 short stories that like The Body is in and Shawshank. And I never finished The Shining, but I started it because I was staying at a house that had it in the house. I have seen The Shining probably 100 times.
Okay, so you're a fan of the movie.
Yeah, it was on TV a lot when I was growing up. And Stand By Me, I had on VHS and loved that movie. I could probably recite it. I've never seen Carrie. I've heard of it, and my reference to Carrie is from an episode of 90210. The spring formal, I think it is, where Brenda and Kelly end up wearing the same dress. And then Kelly is like the queen, and Brenda and Dylan have sex for the first time. And
yes.
Andrea is supposed to go with Brandon, and she has these fantasies of like, you said you liked me. She shows up there, which is not a quote in the book. I was kept waiting for that quote to happen in the book, and it doesn't.
Maybe it happens in the movie. Yeah.
Yeah, it must be. I just remember that so clearly.
I rewatched about half an hour of the original Carrie, the 1976 deceased basic version last night. I meant to get it done in time, but it just didn't happen. And yeah, I only got through really the part about, where there's all this unrealistic, steamy, nude frolicking in the girls' locker room, which I don't think anybody acts like that. Anyway, you should watch it at some point. I do plan on finishing it. Well, my Stephen King journey is a little bit different from yours. I love Stephen King. And as an English teacher, amongst certain people, there's an element of shame to that. I'll always remember on one of my first days as a high school teacher, one of my colleagues asked me, "Who's your favorite writer?" And I said, "Stephen King." And she replied somewhat scathingly, "I'm surprised you'd admit that in an English staff room."
What a bitch.
Right? Luckily,
like what you like.
She doesn't work there anymore, so I don't think she'll listen to this. In addition to it being just kind of cruel to a first-year teacher, I think she's wrong. I think Stephen King is an amazing storyteller and creator of character. Like you mentioned Stand By Me and The Shawshank Redemption. Like it's not just horror. He's prolific and he's had such a huge impact on our culture. So I think he's unfairly denigrated as a genre writer by some. And I think horror in general is unfairly denigrated because it can be literary. Like the atmospheric settings, the use of language to build tension and dread. And in the good stuff, there's almost always a deeper metaphor for the true horror lingering beneath the surface, which we often aim to discuss. And, I think it's just so much more fun to read than a lot of the other authors one might claim to be their favorite to show off in an English staff room. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast, to defend the literary merits of books like Carrie. Even if they never make the book list for high school English classes, they're like the ones I wish I could teach.
Yeah, and I listen to a podcast called Unspooled, which has been around for a long time, but I only discovered it recently. They're covering the AFI Top 100 Movies list from probably several years ago now. There's a lot of discussion there about the unfair, I think equally unfair treatment of horror movies and the way that they are kind of frowned upon and not judged quite fairly. I think the only one that comes close to horror that's on that list is Jaws. But other than that, like, there really isn't any representation. And I agree, that's quite unfair. And also just like, don't yuck someone's yum. What a mean thing to say, whether you're a new teacher or not.
Yeah, don't yuck someone's yum. I love that expression. Let people like what they like. All right, so trigger and spoiler warning. There will be blood. If you're squeamish about periods, you can grow up, but there's a lot of other potentially upsetting content. There's domestic abuse. There's a reference to violence against dogs. There's on-page violence against pigs. Usual trigger warning for horror in general, but ultimately this is about a school massacre, which could be very upsetting if you have any trauma related to school shootings. If so, take care or skip this episode. And as I said, there will be spoilers. So I'll give you a moment to pause, go read it, come back. Okay, let's go. 16-year-old Carrie White, shy, bullied, and misunderstood at school and abused by her mother at home, discovers she has telekinetic powers. When a sadistic prank at the prom pushes her over the edge, she uses her power to take revenge on her tormentors. So that's what Carrie's about. I think it's important to talk about the origin story here. We talked about Pen Pal's origin story in episode 1 as a creepypasta, and Carrie really has a similarly worthy origin story. Do you know about it?
No.
Just over 50 years ago, Tabitha King, Stephen King's wife, fished the initial notes for this novel out of the trash can and read it and told him it was good and you needed to keep going. And so without that fateful moment, King might have abandoned this storyline. I mean, it's a pretty crazy thing to write about as a 26-year-old man, all these young women's perspectives. But had he not published this and, rocketed to fame, there's so much about our culture that would be different. Like you already mentioned Shawshank and Stand By Me and The Shining, but there'd be so many icons of horror that we wouldn't have. The Stand, Annie Wilkes, Pennywise the Clown. We wouldn't have been traumatized by Pet Sematary or touched by The Shawshank Redemption, Stand By Me, and The Green Mile. So you can read more about it in On Writing, but basically King was inspired by a poor girl in his school who wore the same outfit every day, and she was made fun of. But then one day she came in with a different outfit, and she was so happy, but she was mocked just as mercilessly for trying to step out of that box that her classmates had put her in. And, Carrie says at one point she knew that they would push her back down savagely. It was their way. So this was part of what inspired him, having this classmate, the inescapability of this sort of bullying. Then he was also, at the time, he was working as a high school teacher. He worked as a janitor and worked in a laundromat. So he was cleaning a girl's locker room, and he'd read an article about telekinesis, and it all just came together.
That's interesting. I forgot to mention, I've also seen it. I've never seen The Green Mile. I think what's interesting to me about that was even having seen a lot of cultural references to Carrie and being vaguely aware of what it was about, I never knew that there was a whole contingency of people who were feeling sympathetic to her, from the principal to that teacher, the gym coach, to Sue Snell and her boyfriend, all of these people who were kind of coming around to be so kind in a way that to me was very idealistic, I guess. I can't imagine the people I went to high school having that type of conscience. Mm-hmm. It seems to me like, he took a situation that he witnessed and thought about what could have been if they had changed their behavior and what could have been if she was able to stand up for herself in a fantastical way.
Yeah, because we see, her potential, right? Like when she is at the prom.
Yeah, she has that smirky answer, right?
Yeah.
To someone. She's like, makes a joke.
She shows a little bit of personality and snark. Like she shows hope, right? You see that her personality could shine. She talks about feeling like dusted by the enchantment of the evening. So she feels that sense of hope that she can escape her mother. She says, I want to be a whole person before it's too late. And that's what makes what ultimately happens all the more sad. Was prom like that for you? Like this magic, enchanted with dust sort of evening?
Well, our school was really small. We had junior and senior prom together, and so both grades went to both. My junior year prom was pretty special, and I went to it with my current husband.
Aww.
And it was at the aquarium, and it was all lovely. They really hated our grade. There was a lot of people who did a lot of pranks at the school and on the teachers. And so our senior prom was really awful in some conference room of some hotel. So nothing about it was magical at all. No.
I remember having fun, but I don't remember it being magical in any way. So it was like a night to look forward to, but I don't know. I don't see it as being magical. But it is like a icon of American culture, American high school life. The prom is this big moment. Like we have so many movies that build up to that moment, whether it's She's All That or American Pie or does Mean Girls enter the prom too? Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the prom. It's a formal.
It's a formal, yeah. What adjective would you use to describe this?
Tragic. All of these people who were sympathetic to her and thinking, God, I wish she knew this because I know what's going to happen. Aside from being aware of what happens generally through pop culture, there's all the news clippings and the back and forth and stuff like that. So you're aware a tragedy is going to occur. You're aware she's going to lose it. And you just wish that she knew all the good intentions that actually were there.
Yeah. I would describe it as tense and dread-inducing, in addition to tragic, somewhat guiltily satisfying, seeing what she does. You shouldn't cheer her on at all, but you understand her. I think what you said about, the news reports and the knowledge, the foreknowledge that something bad's going down, even if this was the first time you'd read it, the dread comes from that literary technique of telling us the end pretty much from the beginning. One of the first lines is, nobody was really surprised when it happened. Not really. Not at the subconscious level where savage things grow. And though the specifics of that are not made clear at first, we know something bad is going to happen from that moment, which I would like to make a connection to Shakespeare here, because, Shakespeare does that with Romeo and Juliet, right?
Yes, Fair Verona.
Yes. A pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. And that adds a lot of poignancy to the play because we know these kids are doomed from the beginning. And it's the same here. We know Carrie's doomed. And slowly we start to realize that everybody's doomed. The whole senior class, Tommy, the only person whose perspective we still have is Sue. So because King just keeps dropping these hints about how bad it's going to get.
Yeah, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
If you were Sue Snell, what would you do with your life after?
I would like to think I'd become like an anti-bullying crusader, like go and do talks at schools about the horrific impact of bullying. Something like that.
That's way more. I feel like I would change my name and disappear. It's just like, I felt so much for her autobiography or whatever it is that we're hearing her quotes from. I was sort of like, this is even before like social media where everyone could track you down. Now I think I would have no choice but to become a crusader of some kind because people would find me. But back then, if I could disappear, I probably would disappear. I know that's not the noble thing, but I probably couldn't take being such a public person in such a tragic incident, especially because she did have good intentions and there's no way to prove it because the only person who knows that is dead.
Yeah. Some people think she was part of the prank.
For sure. And why wouldn't you? She was friends with that awful girl, Chris.
Yes. Well, let's talk about Sue. She's kind of the every woman, the person who has participated in cruelty despite knowing it's wrong. And I think most people have been there at one point or another, whether it's to someone's face or behind their backs. She feels a mixture of hate, revulsion, exasperation, and pity for Carrie. But she also deeply regrets her actions and she tries to atone for them. So we've got that theme of atonement again, like we talked about in the Midnight Mass episode with Riley and Joe Colley and the Spotlight reporters, and perhaps even Sawyer and Frank from Heaven's Gate. So we've got this ongoing theme of atonement we can keep coming back to. So do you think Sue was right to set Tommy up with Carrie? Was that an act of kindness or a cop-out?
I don't know that I would call it a cop-out, but I think it was a quite dangerous act of kindness because if I were Carrie, I would have also assumed it was a joke. And as soon as something goes wrong, I would be like, I knew it was a joke. So I think it does fall under the kind of too little, too late category, I guess, in my mind. It would have been better for her to just say sorry, but that doesn't do much for Carrie either. So I understand her wanting Carrie to have a great night. I understand her thought was that this girl would benefit more from like a real opportunity to be a teenager than just to hear I'm sorry from me,
I thought Sue's motivation was a tad, I guess, sanctimonious, like making this grand gesture of dropping out of prom and offering her hot prom king boyfriend up on a platter to atone, instead of just going to say sorry and maybe sitting with her at lunch and being nice to her.
Yeah, going to be with her herself would have been better. I didn't totally get the sanctimonious thing only because it didn't seem like she was grandstanding about it. I guess it's noticeable from the people who were there and know that they're dating. But she was just kind of sitting at home, and it didn't seem like she was telling everyone, this is what I'm going to do, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think even she is aware of it. She says that there's a jewel of selfishness winking at her from her subconscious, but she doesn't want to think too deeply of it. So she knows there's something not quite right about what she's offered Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
But I think overall, Sue, she wants to be a good person, but she's a teenage girl, right? She's not
Right.
brave enough or aware enough of the impact of her actions, which I think is pretty realistic. It's easier to just make a grand self-sacrificing public gesture than to just be nice to Carrie, because stepping out of line in that hierarchy of school is probably harder, right? Because then you're a target too.
She is like not nice to Chris at that one point. And so I felt like that was good. She steps on a line in a way, but I agree. Like, she's a teenager. I don't think she really understands. But speaking of realistic teenagers, my number one thing that I starred was like the description of her having sex with her high school boyfriend, Tommy, right?
Yep.
Is the most realistic description of like first time and early sex I've ever read or heard or seen.
How did he
Like,
do it?
It's
Stephen.
I just like, oh my God, that is what it's really like. Like, why did nobody tell me that? I wouldn't have made such a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tabitha must have helped, I think, with that
Yeah.
scene. Because, it's surprisingly really insightful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Tommy, he reminded me of Jeff in Yellow Jackets. Do you remember?
Well, I haven't watched enough of that.
Oh, yes, you have. He's in like the
Like
first episode. He's like
Oh, is that the boyfriend of the other girl, but he sleeps with the girl?
He sleeps with
His
Shauna.
best friend?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the cool high school guy who's
Yeah.
aims for mediocrity in adulthood, but like a nice guy overall. Like Tommy is kind, right? He tells Carrie she's beautiful and he means it. And perhaps he's starting to like Carrie, right? Like it's a little ambiguous.
Mm-hmm. It is. It does seem like he loves Sue.
Yes. So Sue reminds me of Nancy from Stranger Things, or it should probably be that Nancy from Stranger Things reminds me of Sue. The Duffer Brothers are very public Stephen King fans. Carrie and Eleven obviously have a lot in common. But I wonder if Nancy was inspired by Sue as well. Like, Nancy sees her mother's life and is disgusted by it. Like, she doesn't want to be a housewife. She dreads that. And that's what Sue is starting to think about when she's or when maybe she's just finished having sex with Tommy. I can't remember. She thinks about whether or not she'll just end up another housewife in the suburbs, and she's terrified of conforming. She imagines long afternoons ironing and watching soap operas with her hair in rollers, joining the PTA. And I think she connects that dread of conforming to that moment when she joined the other girls. Like, she conformed by torturing Carrie in the Plug It Up scene. And by opting out of prom, she's not conforming. She's just taking herself out of that picture. Whether she would have ended up marrying Tommy and having that life and being okay with it or not, I don't know. But Tommy didn't get the chance. Poor Tommy.
I know, poor Tommy. So, question, did the bucket kill him or did she kill him after? Because it wasn't totally clear. It was clear the bucket knocked him out, but I wasn't sure if it like literally killed him or if she killed him first in her rage.
I think he dies because of her rage. Like, I think he just gets burned up with everybody else. But I think they do say that Tommy died quickly, like he didn't feel anything.
Yeah, I guess it just wasn't crystal super clear which thing killed him. It's so interesting, all of these different, like, going back and describing that moment happens kind of a couple times. And the description of it lasts so long, even though, the moment is like 30 seconds. And so I think because there's so many things happening in such a short period of time, I wasn't 100% sure whether he got knocked out and then he was the first victim of her rage in whatever telekinetic way she could have done that. I don't know.
I feel like she knew he was okay. So we've talked a little bit about Tommy, who's basically a nice guy. Let's talk about Billy. Tommy's foil is Billy. What did you think of him?
Well, he reminds me of Billy from Stranger Things.
Yeah. Well, it's got to be.
I know, right?
Right? They must.
So is Tommy Steve?
I don't think we get to know Tommy well enough to make a Steve comparison. But yeah, I guess, yeah.
Well, no, then it doesn't make sense. Because did you know that Steve was not supposed to become a good guy? That he just was so likable and charming on set that they, like, changed the character for the actor?
I'm so happy they did that. He's so...
I
I love Steve.
I know.
Yes. I mean, maybe. Again, if we're saying that 11 is Carrie and Billy is Billy and Sue is Nancy, then Steve is Tommy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I know you have watched Stand By Me. We've got Ace from Stand By Me. He's in good company with, or bad company with a lot of Stephen King bullies, right? Ace from Stand By Me. Have you seen It?
Yes.
Henry Bowers from It. Stephen King has a lot of
Mm-hmm.
bullies who take it way too far. Like they're scary, they're sociopathic. I mean, they talk about Billy going out cruising for stray dogs and then coming back with his car bloodied.
Yeah, I will say one thing that I appreciate about both horror and Disney movies and stuff like that in this modern era is that there's a lot more recognition that people contain multitudes
Mhm.
and usually hurt people. And if you're a bad guy, it's for a reason. And you're not just a sociopath for no reason. And now, of course, there are sociopaths for no reason. One of them is president of the United States right now. But but the like Chris and Billy couple, I was sort of like, this is the only element of this story that feels dated to me
Mhm.
because you don't really have these one-dimensional villains anymore in modern storytelling, I guess.
I think it is acknowledged that Billy's family is abusive. Like there is just this line about what his home life is like. So it's touched on, but yeah, it's not developed in any way.
Yeah, because like River Phoenix's character in Stand By Me, you can tell like he lashes out, like he has a rep, his family has a rep, and there's all this complexity to it.
But deep down, he's a good boy.
Such a good boy.
Yeah. Ugh, but Billy is not a good boy. I mean, he kills the pigs. I can't remember whose idea was the pig thing. Was that his idea? I feel like Chris would not come up
Well,
with that.
there's all this conjecture about whose idea it was and how much she actually knew.
I mean, she was there for the slitting of the pigs' throats. But yeah, I definitely get the impression that although maybe it starts out with her controlling him, by the end, he's the one in control. He's the one telling her she has to jerk on the rope to bring the buckets down. And you can kind of tell she's, I think, wanting to back out. Like it's going too far for
Mhm.
her. But let's talk about
Mhm.
Chris. She's like Regina George, but up the viciousness to the power of 10, right? Like she's horrendous.
Right. Yeah, the bullies that I grew up with were much more Regina George.
She's so, well, like Regina George, she's privileged, she's entitled. There's a line that reminds me so much of Draco Malfoy. She says at one point, people did not speak to her that way. Her father was a lawyer. It was very my father will hear of this.
My father will hear about this. Yeah, yes, of course. It also reminded me of Heather's because it was much more like less Regina George, more Heather.
Which one?
The first Heather.
Okay.
Yeah, the main Heather, the blonde one.
It's always the blonde one.
Who says corn nuts as she crashes through the table. Yeah, she gets pleasure in the pain of people who are already in pain.
Yes. As a power thing, too. She enjoys the power of punching down, like her father punches down. Have you seen Adam Sandler's movie Leo about the lizard?
Many times.
It's so good, right? I love it. Do you remember the song he sings, You're Not That
About
Great?
how she's not that great?
Chris needs somebody to sing her that song. You're not that great, Chris.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also the father is the same. Like he's a powerful, successful lawyer. Yeah, and I think that's why she is the way she is. By the way, hats off to the principal. Standing applause, standing ovation for not giving into that lawyer dad. That made me so happy.
I know. Also unrealistic.
Also,
but good.
Absolutely unrealistic. But I was like, yes.
But very great. I will say though, this lawyer is an asshole, but you can't beat a child. Like, you cannot be physical with children in school.
Yes, Miss Desjardins. You know, she's like shaking people, slapping people. She's not a good mom.
Yeah, I definitely wrote with this teacher's behavior is insane.
Yeah. Oh, in the movie, she's discussing Carrie with the principal, and she's just like walking around smoking a cigarette, and I'm just like, oh, this is so dated.
So my brother is 8 years older than me, but I remember visiting the high school when I was in elementary school with him, and there was a smoking lounge still.
Oh my God. For the teachers or the high school kids?
For the teachers,
Okay.
but in the school.
In the school. I always remember my biology teacher's papers when they'd come back to us smelled like cigar smoke. We'd always joke about like she was like sitting there marking papers and smoking a cigar. Yeah, I think Desjardins interesting because she admits that she's kind of repulsed by Carrie too. She admits that she feels pleasure when she slaps Carrie. she's probably a cool girl, right? Like, she was cool when she grew up. She was probably higher up in the hierarchy than someone like Carrie. And she hasn't quite shed that, even though she's an adult and she mostly does the right thing. She holds the bullies accountable. She's kind to Carrie at the prom. She tries to help when Carrie's running away. But yeah, she can still feel that inner disgust for Carrie. I thought that was interesting.
I was confused by her, to be honest. I actually didn't register that she had been popular or cool. I was confused by her repulsion, and I wasn't sure if it was like, sometimes I get quite angry with my children when they behave in ways that I know they got from me, and it's a thing I don't like about myself. So I wondered if any of that was going on.
I think she just didn't understand. How could Carrie not know, right? Why is she behaving like this? Like, she's behaving in this crazy way that is inviting this mob of girls to torture her. It's like she's not helping herself at all. And I think she is angry at her for that.
I have a child who I do get frustrated when they don't help themselves. When I'm like, you just make the situation better, not worse, It doesn't have to be as bad as it is. And then they kind of take it in the wrong direction. It is quite frustrating to witness.
Well, speaking of things like the slapping, right? Which should not happen in a school at any time in history, but would definitely not happen now without serious consequences. So let's talk about setting. King loves his main settings. Carrie's the only one he sets in Chamberlain, but, future novels are set in Salem's Lot and Derry and Castle Rock. I want to point out the three basic settings here. We've got the school, the home, and the town itself, and none of them are safe places for Carrie. And she ultimately takes out her revenge on all three. Her home is full of such violent biblical imagery, like Christ's wounds and drowning sinners and the burning of Sodom and Gomorrah, and obviously the crucifixion, which Carrie talks about giving her nightmares. So I think it's so sad that this tortured girl isn't even safe when she goes home.
Yeah, it's horrible. I kind of wish I knew more about her mother's background, because her mother is clearly totally insane. And I guess I wish I had a little bit more insight as to why. And I'm not sure I totally understood what happened with the dad. Like, at first, I sort of assumed the mother killed the dad through telekinesis, but then it seemed later like, no, she doesn't have telekinesis, so I don't know how the dad died.
There's definitely the implication of marital rape, right?
Yes.
But I think she's crazy before that happens.
Yes, never to victim blame, but it seems that the husband would have justified the rape because of the craziness before that. Not that I'm justifying it. It seems like he felt like he was entitled to take what he felt was due him.
Yeah, I think she's clearly damaged before she's married, before she has Carrie, because she's so afraid of and ashamed of sex. So something happened to her, right? That's not normal. But we don't get Margaret White's life before that moment. That's the farthest back we go in time for her. But something must have messed her up, because this is not just normal evangelical beliefs, right? Well, let's talk a little bit more in depth about Margaret White. She's a real piece of work. Showers aren't allowed. Pillows aren't allowed. Those are sinful. Don't be comfortable.
Especially dirty pillows. Don't make those seen.
Yes. She makes Carrie sit through 2 to 3 hours sermons. She's terrified of sex. And she shames Carrie for basic human development. And when she's pregnant, she thinks she has cancer. So she was just as sheltered as Carrie to not understand what was happening to her.
Yeah, it was crazy. Sorry, I'm having visions. I was in Costco when I was listening to this portion of the book where she's in labor and stuff like that. And there's a storm. Wasn't there a storm when she was in labor?
I don't remember.
Or something like that. And neighbors were checking. Anyway, I can see the aisles that I was in my mind when I'm thinking about this.
That happens to me with podcasts and audio.
Yeah, where I'm just I'm looking for child Tylenol and I can't find it, and I'm listening to this and I'm like, what on earth? This woman doesn't know she's having a baby, and then she just has the baby and the baby's there. Did she cut the cord with the same knife she killed her with?
Maybe. I don't know. I didn't make that connection. But
I think she might have.
That sounds very possible. I mean, she's nuts, right? In addition to the pillows, shower, and decor, she gouges her face. But pillows, showers, questionable decor, face gouging, and long sermons are kind of the least of Margaret White's problems. She's abusive. She punishes Carrie by locking her in a closet without food or water or a place to relieve herself. And, she tries to kill her on multiple occasions. She almost murders her when she was a child simply because Carrie saw the neighbors sunbathing. And again, at the end of the novel, she stabs her. like Bev Keane, she's a sermon spouter. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. She calls her daughter Jezebel, devil's child, Satan's spawn.
I really can't reconcile personally, again, as a non-religious person currently. You know, we've recently had someone murder 2 people and shoot 2 others with a list of 70-something other people that they were going to kill, all for the sake of preventing abortions. I just don't understand. Isn't the first commandment, thou shalt not kill? Is that not number 1?
Yeah, once again,
Right.
absolutely cherry picking which things we believe in.
But if you're going to cherry pick, like, number 1 should be number 1. And you don't get excused from number 1 because you're trying to prevent someone else from doing what you think is number 1, which, by the way, the Bible mentions life starts at the first breath, which happens outside the body. But anyway.
Thou shalt not kill is probably, as you said, the most important one. And yeah,
Right.
absolutely insane. Well, using scripture to justify terrible things, I thought it was interesting that Margaret White said, if thine right eye offend thee, pluck it out, which Marshall Applewhite also uses. We discussed this in our Heaven's Gate episode to talk about castration. She thinks about Abraham being willing to sacrifice Isaac to justify murdering her daughter. And she really distorts scripture. Like, there was one quote, I wrote it down because I was like, is this real? This doesn't feel real. And again, as real as any scripture can be. We talked about the Smash Mouth translation an episode or 2 ago. Like,
Right.
how real is any of this? It's just something somebody wrote that we've decided matters. So Margaret White says, Eve was weak and loosed the raven on the world, and the raven was called sin, and the first sin was intercourse. And the Lord visited Eve with a curse, and the curse was the curse of blood. And so I looked that up, and it's not like it was written for this novel, as far as I can tell. So she is kind of taking scripture and then distorting it to fit her worldview, which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, or potentially, because we don't know a lot about her history, potentially the view that was delivered to her.
Yes.
You know, maybe she's spouting off teachings that she had from someone who, for whatever reason, was telling her intercourse is sin, which, how could it be sin if that's the only way you create life?
Yeah, it's actually very different from a lot of Christian evangelical pro-baby views, right?
Right. Have as many kids as you can, right? Yeah.
So you mentioned that, and I've mentioned as well, that most likely Margaret White came from a traumatized background to have these views. She didn't get this in a vacuum, right? So where does our empathy turn off? Do we have any empathy for Margaret White? Like, I think we have empathy for Carrie because we're seeing her abuse. What about her mom?
I think in general, it's quite hard to have empathy for full adults in comparison to children around them. And I think also, you know, Sue, we have the benefit of hearing her remorse. I don't hear remorse from her mom. I don't hear remorse from Chris. I don't hear remorse from Bill. You know, you're never hearing those people feel bad. I mean, I don't know. Actually, I'm sort of second guessing myself because I do have pity for her because she seems so insane.
Right. Like, when does empathy turn off? If we can have empathy for a child who was abused and then goes on to harm others, why don't we have empathy for an adult who was abused as a child? They're just as messed up. The trauma doesn't go away just because you turn 18 and have a kid. I was thinking about that with that Surviving St. Michael's podcast I listened to a while ago about the father who was horrifically abused in the residential schools and then went on to be a violent man himself. And it's like, it explains it, right? Because as we know, trauma changes the brain. I don't know. It's just an interesting thing to think about.
And certainly, you know, I felt empathy for her being raped by her husband. That's not something that should happen to anyone.
No. I think the deep horror with Margaret White is abusing her daughter, which is a part of a lot of King novels. Interestingly enough, I think Stephen King says he had a pretty happy childhood, but he depicts a lot of horribly abusive parents. Like in It, Bev is sexually threatened by her father. Eddie's mother is Munchausen by proxy adjacent, at least. Other kids are, you know, every parent has an issue, right? And there's Jack Torrance in The Shining. He breaks his
Stand by Me.
Stand by Me, yes. I don't know. Margaret White might be the worst of them. Right? She's pretty awful. And I just think it's so sad to grow up hated by your mother. The one person who's really supposed to love you. It's just so tragic and sad. And despite all that, Carrie still loves her. Like, she cries out for her. She wants her mother.
I know.
In her dying moments. It's heartbreaking.
That was really upsetting at the end. I saw the end of one of those like CSI ones where it's Mindhunter-esque crime show. There was a guy who kidnapped one of the people on the team. that was hunting him down on the police force. And she was saying something threatening him, like, you're going to regret this or something, you're going to get caught. And he was like, that may be, but when it's the end, you're still going to cry for your mama just like they all do. Ugh. I know. I have thought of that moment 1,000,001 times. Like, since I saw that, I don't even remember what show it's from, but I just saw that guy say that thing. And I've thought about it, especially because my mother has passed, and I've been like, would I still do that? Like, like, is that a weird? I'm so glad to have this platform of weirdos to ask, because I've wanted to ask that question to people so many times. I'm curious, do you think that you would still do that if you know your mom is gone?
Yeah. Is there some like evolutionary response deep down to want that person in the most dire times, regardless of who they are or where they are, whether they're even still
Or
alive?
whether they can help you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I've
I
seen
don't
that
know.
too, that you'll still cry. Like, I don't know what that's from, but
Listeners, DM us. Yeah. If anyone's out there and they saw this,
yeah.
let us know what it's from.
I think the way Carrie's death is telepathically shared with Sue was interesting, that she's able to share that mix of sadness and fear and rejection and that realization that her life was one long, dirty trick. I think it's such a sad death compared to Midnight Mass, where they talk about that final release of chemicals and endorphins. And despite the horrible way these characters may be dying, they find beauty in their last moments, and Carrie does not.
As long as she's conscious for, I guess.
Yeah,
Potentially she does experience something after that she can't convey.
true.
I don't know.
Well, we've talked about most of the main characters except Carrie. We haven't actually really spoken about her. I think Carrie was not born a monster. I've recently reread Frankenstein, which is a bit of a slog, pretty boring at times, but I think there's a lot of parallels here. Like, the world made Frankenstein's monster into a monster by treating him like a pariah, rejection, and they did the same to Carrie. So the horrible acts that Carrie and Frankenstein's monster go on to commit are the reactions to grave injustices and cruelty. So we sympathize with them. It's not okay that they did it. It's not okay for Carrie to kill everyone in her high school class, but we can kind of understand. And in that understanding, is there a part of you that cheers her on?
No, I didn't have any cheering her on. I kept wanting to be like, but wait, no, this wasn't a trick. Like, I kept wanting to be like, no, it was just that bitch and her boyfriend.
Yeah.
Everyone else was actually either okay or just like dealing with it.
Having a weird psychological response, laughing when you're uncomfortable. Most of them.
Right, which I do. I laugh when I'm uncomfortable. It's horrible. I have laughed in very inappropriate things that I am so upset about, but it's a nervous response for some people that they
Yeah.
can't help.
Except for that person who trips her as she's running away.
Yeah.
Like, that moment that somebody could look at this crying, running, blood-soaked victim of this prank and think, I'm going to trip her. That had me maybe a little bit complicit in the mob, the baying mob. Like, I get it. I get why she turns around. It's not right. And I would never want to be defending school shooters or anything like that. But because we
No,
are
God,
seeing her
no.
perspective, I think in a way, maybe Stephen King, by writing her perspective, makes us complicit. Like, we are the girls in the locker room throwing the sanitary pads and everything because we sympathize with her. We comply. I don't know. Is that a bit meta?
I guess I was so hyper-focused on what Carrie wasn't aware of. I was distracted by it so much that I wasn't even really thinking about these other shitty things people did. But I also think at the same time, like, I've been in situations where people were like shitty on road rage or something like that. And I laugh at them because I'm like, wow, it must suck to be you. Like, if you feel the need to be this shitty, I feel bad for you. I already felt bad for Carrie. I guess I didn't even register. I mean, I registered that the trip happened. I just didn't even think about the person who did it because they're so nothing. And in a way, being nothing is worse.
Mhm.
You don't even matter. I don't even think about you.
Mhm.
Like that Mad Men thing,
Oh,
in the elevator.
I don't know Mad Men that well. I believe you.
There's a meme where he's like, says, God, I wish I remember what the
Oh, but
younger
what
kid
about
says, but he's like,
Andor in the Gorman? Who are you? Like that?
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm.
Yeah. Where it's just like, there is no more crushing feeling than being nobody
Yeah.
to a person that you really put a lot into. I looked it up. It's, I feel bad for you, is what the guy says, the younger guy. And then Don Draper says, I don't think about you at all.
Oh, snap.
What's worse?
Carrie at the end reminds me of Cersei Lannister. I choose violence. She
Yeah.
does make a decision. Carrie was damaged. When Tommy asks her to prom, Stephen King writes that she looks up from her books with a startled wince as if expecting a blow. It's like she's an abused dog, right? So she was made into this monster. But then she does make that decision. This is not a 100% heat of the moment lashback, right? She could have walked away, but she turns around and she takes it out on everybody, both guilty and innocent alike.
Right. That really, I can't get behind.
I can see getting the guy who tripped her. I guess if you push people too far, though, there will be collateral damage, right? I mean, I just mentioned Andor. Like, Andor is really about how does somebody become radicalized, right? How does somebody join the rebellion? It's because of horrific experiences that drive them to it. And again, Carrie is arguably a paranormal school shooter, right? She kills guilty and innocent alike, but she was driven to it. And again, how culpable can a 16-year-old be? We know their brains are not developed. She's a teenager. She's lashing out like many of us would lash out in a horrifically traumatic situation. She just happens to be a ton more powerful. Like, I think of the baby in Incredibles 2. Remember the baby? He can't control his powers, so he acts on his impulses, like he turns into a fire demon when he doesn't get a cookie. What bullied kid wouldn't do what little they could if they had the power to fight back? And Carrie just has too much power and an undeveloped brain in a horrible, sadistic moment. And she makes that terrible decision.
School shootings being so horrific, I don't think we'll ever cover one on this. Like,
Agreed.
As a kid, I don't plan to ever. So I think we can say we're not going to discuss them. But as close as it is to that, she devastates an entire town kind of forever.
Yeah.
The factory goes out of business. Nobody wants to live there. It's way beyond the scope of her bullying, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. She's enjoying herself by the end to some extent. She's kind of delighting in the carnage. She's giggling as she electrocutes people. I really like the way King keeps repeating flex as she's flexing her powers. And she really takes it up a notch when she takes out the fire hydrants. She didn't plan this, but once she gets going, she is pretty conniving.
Yeah, it's horrible.
In On Writing, Stephen King, which he wrote, I think, a couple decades after he wrote this, he compares her to Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris of Columbine. Do you think that's fair?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to compare her to school shooters.
Yeah. I do think the time passed in between the bullying and the vengeance matters. It's not 100% heat of the moment. She makes this decision, but it's pretty quick. Whereas Columbine, I think they planned it for like a year or something before they actually took action.
Yeah, they did. And legally, there's a difference between manslaughter and murder, right? And that is forethought and planning. But it still feels like splitting hairs a little bit because I think there's so many people you're traumatizing beyond the people just in the room to pay for what you've been through. And they're not really responsible. And a very important quote that I think about a lot is, and I'm sure that she was quoting somebody else, but a podcaster named Amanda from a podcast called Wine and Crime,
Okay.
who you will hear me recommend again. She often mentions that your mental health issues, your addiction, etc., your trauma, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. It is not your fault what happened to you, but it is your responsibility to deal with it in a way that isn't damaging other people and isn't paying it forward. Retaliation is never going to be the right way to deal with it.
Which goes back to what we were talking about with Margaret White and whether or not we should have empathy for her. It is her responsibility to not harm her daughter. And yes, hurt people. People who were abused as children may be more likely to abuse their own children, but there's plenty of people who don't do that, right? This is not an inevitability. There are plenty of abused people who go on to put good into the world rather than harm, right? It doesn't have to be like that.
Absolutely. Can I say something about the setting?
Yes.
Because there is a moment where I think Sue mentions a country club membership once you get a 5-figure salary. And I found that mind-blowing. That a 5-figure salary would be enough to give you a country club membership.
Yeah.
I was really like, wow. But then I went to Time Money Converter. And if you had a $10,000 salary back in 1974, that would be $65,206 today. And a $30,000 salary would be $195,000. $618 today. I still don't think either of those as a household income is enough for a country club.
I don't think so. I think in On Writing, Stephen King talks about earning about somewhere in the $6,000 range a year as a teacher at that time.
Oh my God.
And he was living in a trailer. They didn't have a phone. He couldn't afford medicine for his kids as a teacher.
Well, that's relatable.
And guess what happened?
In this country, sorry.
I would like to do the calculations on, he got a $400,000 paperback deal for this book. What's that in today's money? I mean, I think he only got half of it, right? Because, of all the other people who take a cut.
Well, if 30,000 is like 200 grand, that's a lot.
That's a lot. I'm not going to do the maths because that is not something I'm good at. But yeah, and he talks about how his wife called him and he was so nervous because he knows if he was getting a phone call at work, his wife had to go to somebody else's house to call because they didn't have a phone. That's how poor they were. So what a success story. I love it.
Oh, and so glad he didn't turn into a horrible person like J.K. Rowling, who was also really poor.
He's a good person. He is really anti-Trump.
He seems like a great person.
I mean, he's a boomer. He makes his mistakes, right? But overall, he's doing the right thing.
Sure. Can I ask you another question?
Yes.
Your prom king and queen, were they the popular people?
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to remember who they were. Yeah, they were popular and nice.
Yeah, ours were always like the very nice people. They were not part of the popular crew. Everyone got along with them. They were nice to everyone, but nobody had any issue with them. And actually, my senior prom king and queen are both gay now, but they weren't out in high school.
There you go. Okay, scariest part or most disturbing part. What do you think?
I mean, just when I think about all those kids like burning and that is awful.
Yeah, being trapped in a crowded space and not able to escape. We talked about that in previous episodes with Midnight Mass. The way the doors slam shut and then there's a stampede, that's horrifying. It makes me want to not leave the house. I would have trouble going to like concerts and stuff now for that reason.
I have an issue, as you know. I don't think the listeners know.
Oh, you talked about it last week.
I have issues with crowds. I do not like crowded environments. It's too chaotic. So
I'm much more comfortable these days at home with a puzzle and a movie I've already watched. For me, I think the plug it up scene is so cruel. It's not scary, but it's disturbing. In general, I think I find the cruelty of the bullying the most disturbing thing in this. As I said, the moment that somebody actually trips her, she's running away from prom, I found that really horrific. Another horrible moment for me is Carrie killing her mother, the way she stops her mother's heart using her telekinesis. I thought that was a really scary way to kill somebody.
That might have been the only part I was rooting for her.
Okay, so you were on Carrie's side a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, for that, because it was her mother's fault. It wasn't those kids' fault. Those kids, partly their fault is their underdeveloped brain. Partly it's crowd, hive mentality and all that stuff. But yeah, I was rooting for her when she killed her mom.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Avatar: The Last Airbender?
No.
Oh, you should watch that. You'll love it. There's characters who can blood bend, so they can control liquid, so they can control the liquid in people's bodies and use it to...
Wait, that's not the first Avatar movie?
I'm not talking about the movie, Blue People movie, not that. Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's a cartoon. You have to watch it. It's really good. Anyway, it reminded me of blood bending in Avatar, and is it the Imperious Curse in Harry Potter?
Vader.
Yeah. And Vader, yeah. But Vader doesn't go inside, right? Vader's just strangling.
Well, he chokes. My husband wants to quote from Rogue One, "Be careful not to choke on your aspirations, critic."
Yes. I love that
loves
line.
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good one. My new favorite line from a Star Wars related media is "Calibrate your enthusiasm" from Andor. It's similar vibe to that line.
Andor's the best.
It's the best. All right. I know obviously there's the iconic imagery of Carrie just covered in red and only the whites of her eyes showing, and then that raw, hysterical laughter that she hears. It's so iconic. And I think it's just a part of our cultural literacy. Like you said, you really didn't have much interaction with this except for 90210. But even so, like you went into this with that blood-soaked imagery of Carrie at the prom in your head.
Yes, and I also thought of Scream when he's like corn syrup. Same thing they use for Pig's Blood and Carrie.
I was thinking about just like what it would have been like to read this without knowing, where things would have been a bit of a twist, right? I think I might have mentioned I've been very, very slowly rereading Dracula. And, when Dracula is first introduced, my immediate reaction is dread because I know that name. But there was a time when the first people reading this would have had no pre-existing associations with that name and would just be like, hey, this guy's kind of creepy, but they wouldn't have known what was to come. And I always just think, wouldn't it be interesting to be able to read these iconic things for the first time without that foreknowledge? Let's see. What about criticism? Do you have any criticism?
I think that the spirit and intention of the period scene was accurate. I experienced all sorts of horrific girl bullying. I'm sure you did as well. But I think that because periods are things that all girls experience and it's embarrassing for all of us. Sorry, I should say girls assigned female at birth, that I can imagine a lot of people getting behind teasing someone else about something, but not really this topic. And it's not that the topic is icky to me. It's just that I just think so many people who are at that age and are experiencing the same thing are embarrassed enough that they wouldn't call it out in that way. So I thought that every other aspect of that scene was real, but what it was about, maybe not super so to me.
That makes sense.
But the only other thing, I really didn't think Tommy was super believable as a boy that exists.
Yeah, Mr. Perfect.
A teenage boy that exists. Yeah, like he was so well-rounded and so kind and so perfect and so well-intentioned and willing to go on a date with the dorky girl. Whatever he ended up feeling about her later, I just don't think that boy exists that isn't scripted.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone who would have been the Tommy of my school. No way.
Like Brandon Walsh, but he's also scripted.
He's scripted. There's nobody like Brandon Walsh. Come on.
No.
Just going back to what you said before, why are we so disgusted by menstrual blood as a society? Is it the everyone hates women Barbie speech? Like, why would those girls take her down for something that they've all gone through? And I think Miss Desjardins says maybe there's some kind of instinct about menstruation that makes women want to snarl. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and maybe I have too much sense of like, I wouldn't want that to happen to me. Like I wouldn't want someone to call out when I'm on my period, so I would never do that.
Well, you are a highly empathetic person.
Yeah, I would never do a lot of these things.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Part of me thinks yes. I mean, I told my fifth grader who just graduated fifth grade, had a health class where they talked about bodies and stuff like that. And I mentioned something about periods to him after knowing that he had been through that class, and he didn't know anything about it because I guess he was only taught about his body. And I was kind of upset by that. I think that lack of familiarity with the topic is what makes it something people get terrified by, threatened by, find an opportunity to tease, etc. So if you just take away that mysteriousness about it, then there's nothing left to tease.
Yeah, we need to take away the taboo. Like, I think about the number of times a girl has come up to me in class and like whispered with, like she's all ashamed, like, oh, I've got cramps or I have to go to the bathroom for my period. I'm like, go. Like, but part of me wants to be like,
Yeah.
Here's a tampon. Who cares if the boys see? Let's be out there. This is something we all have.
Yeah, but at the same time, like I understand body fluids are weird, and whether it's a girl body fluid or a boy body fluid, I don't really want to deal with boy fluids either,
Yes, they're gross. Let's just step on them. One criticism I have, and I wish Tabitha had stopped him from doing this, is this superfluous description of breasts. I mean, the reference to dirty pillows, I'm actually okay with that because that's a sign of Margaret White's insanity that she thinks breasts are dirty pillows, right? Because that's reflecting her shame.
And she uses the same word that Austin Powers uses to describe.
Which one?
Dirty pillows.
Dirty pillows.
Like,
Oh, yeah.
That's how Austin Powers describes.
Okay,
That's
because
the
he got it
only
from
other
this.
place I'd ever heard that term.
Yes.
Yeah.
He definitely got it from this. I don't remember that.
No.
Okay. Even Miss Desjardins, the PE teacher, she's described with a whistle dangling between her small breasts. Like, why? Why do we need that description? Doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, I think Chris is described as wearing no bra and jiggling, and Sue refers to it as a dirty old man's dream or a dirty young man's dream. Stephen King, 26.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a request. When you become a famous author and you're writing about men and boys, no, just men. When you're writing about men, I want to leave minors out of this. When you're writing about men, I want you to mention how loose their pants are with lots of room to spare. Like nothing is bulging. Everything, like unless it's a gut, that might be bulging.
No, thank you. I would not objectify men like that. Gross.
Here I am talking about how hurt people, and that's not an excuse.
Yes, you just
And
want
I'm
me to
like,
take
when you're a writer.
vengeance on all the male writers who've described breasts throughout history. Oh, another thing, I think there's a bit of fat phobia in this. He describes Margaret White as a big woman. Her legs swelled, her feet overflowed her shoes. And I think Carrie's described in that way a little bit too, which just something to point out. And I think that reflects the time, right? The 1970s was...
Well, it hasn't totally ended. But...
No, and it probably never will. What did you think of the format, the epistolary format, like that mix of police reports and testimony and articles?
I really enjoyed that. I, in general, like things to be broken up in some way or another, whether it's by perspective or by time. I really appreciate that in all forms of storytelling. I find it to be very fascinating and interesting. And I also love what happens in my own head when things start to piece together. So I loved that. It's not just a juxtaposition of time and perspective, but also the types of things that are being described. Like some of it's quite logistical and factual, and some of it is quite emotional and, I don't know, more in depth, and you feel like you're there. That is also a fun, like, switch up for your brain.
Yeah, I think it's a fun way to fill in those blanks rather than just giving us different characters' perspectives and how they're seeing it, to kind of see how the world saw this. Most of the time I liked it, I agree with you, but there were times towards the end as the action was ramping up where they would take a break for a testimony, and I was like, wait, no, just give me Carrie. Like, I just want to know what's happening in this moment with her. But yes, otherwise I liked it. Okay. Do we have any unanswered questions? Do you have any unanswered questions that we haven't discussed?
Yeah, I already mentioned I wanted to know more about her mom and her dad. Like, I really just wish I knew more about the history of her life. And I think also, I understand that Chris's dad is a lawyer, but, like, is that enough to be such a nightmare? I don't know.
I think
like,
so.
What else is going on with her?
Was it? Oh, I thought you
Well-
meant he's a nightmare. Yeah.
Yes. Because you know what? Sandy Cohen from the OC is a lovely lawyer.
Okay. Not all
Dad.
lawyers, not all
And-
lawyer children.
I know he's a public defender and all that, but I was curious.
Oh, yeah, he's the right kind of lawyer for TV.
Right kind of eyebrows, right kind of lawyer.
Eyebrows. Mr. Eyebrows. Do you think telekinesis is possible?
No, I think you know I would say no. Do you?
No, but okay, I feel like I'm doing free advertising for Last Podcast on the Left because
You are.
I keep...
Me from TCO and you last podcast. We have to talk.
Yeah, I mean, come on, Marcus and Henry, I've told our 10 fans about you multiple times. Return the favor to your thousands. They have an episode on the Enfield poltergeist that I listened to, and it's one of those things where there's a lot of documented activity that other people besides the family involved witnessed and is very hard to explain. And I also listened to a podcast about raining stones with different stories of poltergeists in Australia, which is how Carrie's powers first manifest. Like, there's raining stones when Margaret White locks her in the closet and almost murders her. So yeah, I possibly believe in the possibility of poltergeist because there are these moments that have been documented that are not really adequately explained as hoaxes. And then the idea that poltergeist activity usually coincides with a girl going through puberty. So is telekinesis potentially the control of a poltergeist or something like that? I don't know. I think it's interesting to think about. But yeah, I don't think I believe in it.
This is secondhand, but I was at dinner with my mother-in-law. Her best friend has twins, and when one twin broke a bone, the other twin felt it at that moment, supposedly. And I have also heard of all these like instances where there are twins separated at birth through adoption or whatever other thing that they wouldn't do in this day and age, but they used to. And that they end up with the same haircut, wearing the same kind of clothes, marrying the same person, the same kind of profession, having the same, like having a lot of these connections that you couldn't explain in our modern understanding of science and the world. And I do think that there is a level of connection between people that maybe we don't get, but I don't think that, you could disappear the glass between you and the snake for Dudley Dursley.
I guess that's the question. Do we all have a touch of The Shining if we were willing to listen, right? Like that time where you hear about babies and and tweens where the veil is thin. Like my niece.
Or the Force.
Or the Force, yes. My niece always would walk into my in-laws' living room and point up into the corner and say, "Ghosty," when she was about 2 years old, and she didn't do it anywhere else. And I've probably told you this story about my daughter when she was like, I don't know, little, like 3 or 4. We were at my parents' house, and she said, "I've got something in my head, and I can't get it out. Hannah Johnston's in the house."
Mm-hmm.
And have I told you that before?
Yes.
On this podcast?
No,
Okay.
no. I don't think so. Not on this podcast.
Yeah, and I just was like, where did she get that? What is being communicated to her? So I don't know. I like us, I'm open to those things. Another unanswered question I have is there's this moment when Sue Snell gets her period right at the end and she is not pregnant. And there is a reference to a howling, cheated scream. And I thought that was interesting. Why does she feel cheated that she's not pregnant?
Because that boy loved her.
Yeah.
And he's gone. I think part of her wanted him to be able to continue as a person.
Yeah, and that's the end of him, the end of his line.
Yeah, and he's just gone.
Yeah.
I don't think she wanted to be a mother, but I do think she wanted him to be able to live on.
Yeah. And I think like biologically, our bodies want to be pregnant. Rationally, we don't, right? And there have been times when I have rationally not wanted to be pregnant, but been late or whatever and thought, oh, I might be. And then I get my period. And even though I don't want a baby at that point in my life, whether it's because of my career, my free time, my finances, my age, my ability to sleep, I'm rationally relieved. But there's like this tiny, tiny, tiny little part of me that is disappointed. I get the cheated scream, even though it doesn't make sense for her lifestyle at that moment to be pregnant. I think that's a real feeling. For me, at least. I would not speak for all women at all. But
yeah, she could have used Phoebe in that moment.
What happened with Phoebe? Remind me.
When Rachel takes up the second pregnancy test in case it's wrong.
Yes.
And then Phoebe's like, "You're not pregnant." And she's like, "Oh, that's okay." You know, she's like crying. And then Phoebe's like, "No, you are. But now you know how you feel."
That was a risky trick or something, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Risky little game.
A risky little game. All right, let's talk about the real horror beneath the surface. Obviously, the bullying, the cruelty, the viciousness of teenage girls, and not just girls, obviously, boys too, which I think harkens back to our discussion of Sweet Bobby and what happens there. Religious extremism, the use of scripture to justify evil, which reminds me of Midnight Mass and Bev Keane. By the way, I listened to a last podcast on the left about Revelations, and no one should be taking spiritual guidance from that book. It's hell and apocalypse fan fiction that was probably just anti-Roman propaganda that made sense at the time, 68, 69 AD. John, the whatever, has not predicted anything. Please don't take it literally, like the Margaret Whites and Bev Keanes of the world.
I think we might have lost anyone religious a few episodes ago.
Absolutely. Sorry. Sexual repression, control of women's body, shaming, how women can become the source of our own oppression, how we can perpetrate the patriarchy, the way the girls are condemning Carrie in the tampon throwing scene. It's a stoning, it's mass hysteria, and the way we in groups lose our empathy and our humanity. And of course, child abuse, that the call is coming from inside the house with Carrie, that home is not a safe place. And I feel so sorry for those kids who don't have a sanctuary. And finally, parents who ride in on their white horse to save their horribly privileged brats. I'm talking about Chris's lawyer dad.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Any other deeper horror? Oh, having said that, if the principal had let Chris off the hook, maybe the entire senior class would have lived, but oh well.
Oh my God. That might be the greatest horror.
Yeah. Do we learn anything about survival?
No. Did you?
Know your exits. Pay attention to the flight attendants.
Right. Seat 11A or whatever that guy was in that
I know.
Air India flight.
I know. That's...
I'm only going to book the 11th row.
I mean, that guy's got to be the next star of Final Destination, right? He survived a plane crash. He was meant to die. Don't be cruel. I always think of that scene in Billy Madison where Adam Sandler calls up the kid he bullied in school and says sorry. And then Steve Buscemi crosses him off his people to kill list.
I love that scene.
But you never know who the rage you are causing by being cruel. So just be nice.
Right.
And sex ed. Sex ed is necessary. Carrie should have known what was going on. Understanding basically bodily functions is necessary for everybody. Boys should know about periods too.
1,000%. I agree.
Overall, did you like it? Would you recommend it?
Yes, I thought it was great.
Great.
I would recommend it. I have a question for you. Is part of the reason that you love this movie, or sorry, book, is it that in the last scare scene where there's another kinetic
Telekinetic?
telekinesis telekinetic having person?
A
What do you
telekinetic
call a
child?
person who has
Telekinetic.
telekinetic child?
Yeah.
Okay. That her name is Anne and that the other one's name is Carrie?
You know what? I didn't even notice that.
Stop it. Really?
No, I like that scene because I was like, ooh, it's not over, right? This could happen again. But yeah,
You didn't notice that she had your name?
no, right over my head.
That's hilarious. So, sorry, listeners, Annie's sister's name is Carrie.
Yes, I've got
So
a lot of
that's
Carolines in my
what,
life.
at the very end, I was like, oh, she loves this movie because it's Anne.
Nope, nothing to do with my love
Or
of
book.
this book or movie. I'm not that self-centered. Come on.
No, it's just about, you feel connected to a thing.
Yeah.
If you
I do feel
involved.
connected to. It's funny because normally I do notice that. Like I remember feeling very connected to Annie from Speed. Sandra Bullock's character is named Annie,
Oh.
and as you know, Keanu Reeves in Speed was one of my first crushes. I could imagine myself in her situation, and it helped that I had the same name. And also Annie Murphy. I love that her name is Annie from
Yeah.
Schitt's Creek. Her real name, not her character name. Okay. Do you have a palate cleanser?
I do. So lately, I think I've mentioned in earlier episodes that my kids and I like to watch TikTok at night. Lately, we've been watching these stormtrooper vlogging videos where it's like a guy in a stormtrooper. I think it's all created by AI because there's all this crazy graphic scenery and everything. The first one we saw was like, hey guys, we just got a new assignment from Vader's bitch ass and he's sending us to Endor. And like it's hilarious. Then they're like, I think I saw a little furry thing chasing after us. Then they end up in a tree and he's like, guess those were real, huh? And he's like, I thought you made them up. And there's a whole long series of it. So let me shout out the creator. Their name is @Stormtrooper Vlogs with a Z. So Stormtrooper the way you would expect, and then VLOGZ.
That sounds
on TikTok.
Amazing. I love Star Wars humor. That's my jam. Have you ever seen the SNL skit Undercover Boss with Adam Driver?
Of course, I love Undercover Boss. And then we also, the old like Robot Chicken skits and stuff like that. Like all of them are great. Yeah, so highly recommend.
I will have to check that out. Thank you. All right, so if you like this and you want to hear someone with better credentials than us discussing Carrie, there's a 50th anniversary episode on the podcast Talking Scared with the host Neil McRobert, who's like a professor of Gothic literature. So it's a great podcast in general for academic conversations with authors about horror. I've listened to all his episodes on books that I've read, but there's a part of me that just wants to start at the beginning of his podcast and take all his horror recommendations. Obviously, you should watch the various Carrie adaptations. I'm looking forward to Mike Flanagan's take in 2026. Read On Writing by Stephen King. It's a great autobiography, as well as full of some wonderful writing advice. And he goes into the story of how Carrie came to fruition in more detail. If you're looking for Stephen King books with similar vibes, The Institute, Dr. Sleep, and The Shining all have Stephen King kids with powers. I also recommend The Haunting of Hill House, the book. Carrie's first evidence of telekinesis is Raining Rocks, which is definitely a reference to Eleanor Vance in Shirley Jackson's novel, and she is also the source of our sign-off quote about delighting in what you fear. This is, as we said, an epistolary novel, so it's in good company with Dracula, which is a collection of diary entries, letters, memos, and news. It's the sense of dread still holds up. Some other really good epistolary novels that I want to cover at some point are World War Z and Fantastic Land. The Mist and Midnight Mass for religious extremists who quote scripture and wreak havoc. For bullying stories, you could go classic with Lord of the Flies. Carrie is the piggy of this story, but she actually fights back. Let the Right One In, I've recommended before, is a vampire story with a horrible bully. And of course, Stephen King's It. If you want something a little bit lighter, you could watch some prom movies like She's All That and Footloose and American Pie. Can you think of any other good prom?
I love She's All That.
Yeah. I mean, She's All That is this, right? He was like taking her.
Napoleon Dynamite has bullying and a dance at the end. Let's see. Pretty in Pink.
Pretty in Pink. Well, there's some questionable stuff in Pretty in Pink now, but it still has a special place in my heart. I mean, all these prom stories are Cinderella stories, right? Like, this is a Cinderella story. They both feature horrifically abused young women who go to a dance and get revenge. Cinderella took the living well is the best revenge path, and Carrie chose total annihilation.
Oh, can we plug Ever After, which I think is the best Cinderella story of all time?
I love Ever After. Yes, Ever After. For girls with powers, The Girl with All the Gifts is a great book. Matilda, the musical. Have you seen that yet?
No.
Oh my God, it's so good. It makes me cry every time. The little actress who plays Matilda is so good. I went into Matilda the musical like really resistant because I'm a 90s Matilda fan, but I have to say, I think I like this movie better. The girl who plays Matilda is also in this kind of fun vampire movie called Abigail. And let's see. Oh, I'm a little hesitant to recommend this because I actually haven't read it, but there's this book called Mary by Nat Cassidy, and he was heavily influenced by Carrie, but it's about a woman whose powers come out in menopause. So I'm interested in picking that up, and it gets good reviews, so that's high on my list. Oh, and Stranger Things. We've talked about all the parallels. Finally, Mean Girls. I think this might be the third time I've recommended Mean Girls in our 9 episodes. So I might just like say Mean Girls is an ongoing recommendation. Watch Mean Girls every time it comes on TV, which seems to be a lot.
So we get to talk to Tina Fey and tell her about our podcast.
Yes, Tina
Because we've been
Fey,
plugging her.
we are your number one fans.
So a recommendation that's also kind of a palate cleanser, because you mentioned trying to think about if you had read this without knowing anything about it. Another thing I love to watch on TikTok is reaction videos to kind of shocking twists in cinema. So it feels weird to call the movie Crazy Stupid Love cinema, but there is a lot of videos where people react to that party scene in Crazy Stupid Love. I'm not going to spoil anything if you haven't seen it, but
I haven't.
that is a very fun thing to watch, like people's reactions to, because now it's been long enough since the original Star Wars. There are people who are not aware of the connection between Luke and Vader. If you're listening to this and you're not, sorry, but you can watch reaction videos of people seeing Star Wars and realizing the connection between Luke and Vader. Also, scenes in Grey's Anatomy. There have been several kind of shocking reveals in Grey's Anatomy. And then the other thing that is not at all a palate cleanser, it's quite the opposite. The show Adolescence, which a lot of people have talked about, and I think is one of the best shows ever made, devastatingly so. It also explores situations where everyone's a little bit accountable. There's no one bad guy. There's accountability kind of on all sides. And how do you reconcile that? And how do you deal with it? And how do you cope in the aftermath? And how do you atone for it as a family member, etc.? So highly, highly recommend Adolescence.
I haven't been able to bring myself to watch that yet. It sounds so sad and
It's
dark.
rough.
Yeah.
It is very, very dark.
Okay. Your next homework assignment is going to be, in response to Carrie, you have an episode you'd like to focus on. Caroline, what was that?
Yes. So it was hard to choose what thing to pick of this case, but I wanted us to watch the Hulu docuseries called The Act. It's Hulu here in this country. What's it on for you?
I think it's on like random channel 7 or something here. It's like not on anything, but it's available.
Okay. So it's called The Act, and it covers the case of Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose Blanchard dealing with abusive mothers and their daughters who fight back.
Yes, very clear connection there. And we want to give you a heads up because we're going to recommend another book after that.
So we also wanted to talk about Catch and Kill in relationship to Jaws. In my mind, the true crime of Jaws is the cover-up. And so it most reminded me of Catch and Kill, which was an amazing book to read. And so I wanted to highly recommend that and for us to go for that one next as a book.
Okay, so next episodes are The Act and then Catch and Kill. So that way, if you need to get out that library book, you have the time to do that. Okay, thank you for listening. Please do all the things podcasters ask you to do. Tell a friend, write a review on iTunes, and if, like Shirley Jackson, you delight in what you fear, join us in 2 weeks here at Drawn to Darkness. Special thanks to Nancy Azzano for our cover art. You can find her on Instagram at Nancy Azzano, and to Harry Kidd. You can also find him on Instagram and Spotify.